Is Spider-Man 2 better than Spider-Man 2? Well, let me clarify a little bit. Is Spider-Man 2, the movie, the game from 2004, better than Marvel's Spider-Man 2 from 2023? I was asking myself that very question as I was wrapping up my time with Spider-Man 2, or the one with two Spider-Men, earlier this year. You see, I had always heard that Spider-Man 2, okay, from here on out, it's Spider-Man 2004 and Spider-Man 23, unless I say otherwise or like context makes that clear. Does that work? Great. So as I was saying, I had always heard that Spider-Man 2004 is one of the best superhero games ever made, and that while there have been some solid Spider-Man games published in the years since, they all ultimately fall short of 2004 for one reason or another. After finishing Spider-Man 23, a game that I actually kind of loved, I kept thinking about Spider-Man 2004. Since I had never played it but heard such high praise for it, I couldn't help but wonder if it was an experience that I'd walk away from liking even more than Spider-Man 23. So I borrowed my friend Josh's PS2, bought a copy of the game on eBay, and I played it. You know, as someone who's brand new to the game, I feel like I'm specifically qualified to talk about its merits since I don't have any nostalgic connection to it outside of loving the movie that it's based on.
Hi. This is really heavy.
After playing through the game, I was able to revisit that question, is Spider-Man 2004 better than Spider-Man 23? And I came up with this answer. No. But before you click away, know that answering that question is a lot more complicated than simply saying yes or no. There's a lot to Spider-Man 2004 that I was really impressed by, and while I do think that Spider-Man 23 is a better game, I also don't think that directly comparing a game that's nearly 20 years old to something that came out recently is in any way fair. Of course, Spider-Man 23 is going to be better in a lot of areas. It's had 20 years of game design refinement and hardware innovations to lean on, but what's so impressive about Spider-Man 2004 is how much of its DNA is baked into the core experience of Spider-Man 23, to the point where the game even does some things better than its contemporary. I think that the first place that most people will draw comparisons from is the web swinging, since it's such a central mechanic of both games. While it is pretty similar in both titles, they aren't exact copies of each other. Spider-Man 23 takes a pretty simple approach to its swinging. It's extraordinarily satisfying since both Spider-Men look so cool and fluid doing it, and it's really easy to do. For the most part, even without upgrading it at all, the swinging is fun, it looks good, and makes players feel like they're skilled as they whip past buildings and between cars, even though the mechanic doesn't actually require much refined skill at all. That is not the case in Spider-Man 2004.
If I can help.
Hey, Spidey!
When I first started the game, I was convinced that the swinging was actually quite bad, and that anyone who vouches for it over the swinging in Spider-Man 23 is being blinded by nostalgia. It felt like every time I wanted to get anywhere, I was face-planting into walls, slamming on the ground, and missing seemingly easy turns. Initially, I chalked that up to old games being old with bad controls, but as I spent more time with Spider-Man 2004, I started to get the hang of its swinging mechanics and realized that while it controls similarly to Spider-Man 23, Spider-Man 2004 asks players to be much more deliberate with how they make their way through the city. You'll see in the footage I use of Spider-Man 2004 that my web swinging skills get drastically better after taking the time to practice the mechanic a little bit and treat it like it's something that's meant to be deliberately engaged with, as opposed to a simple means of getting from one place to another, no matter how stylish. Also, this isn't to say that absolutely no skill goes into Spider-Man 23's swinging, but with Spider-Man 2004, you have to take into account a lot more variables, like the height of the buildings around you, your current speed, which hand is being used to connect to buildings. That last one is crucial for taking and turning corners. Something to note is that Spider-Man 23 actually has a feature that allows you to play the game with more realistic swinging physics. You can access the feature by turning down the swing steering assist setting, which when turned on, which it is by default, helps the swinging feel more fluid at the loss of realistic momentum. I've seen some people argue that turning that setting off makes the swinging feel like Spider-Man 2004, but I just don't think that's true. The game doesn't suddenly become as physics-based as Spider-Man 2004 is, so I don't think it adds much to the discussion of Spider-Man 23's web swinging qualities. So, is the swinging better in Spider-Man 2004? You're gonna hate me. Yes and no. I know that's a frustrating answer, but just bear with me for 1 second. For the type of game that Spider-Man 2004 is, its swinging mechanics fit it perfectly. While it does bear a lot of resemblance to Spider-Man 23 at its core, it's a much simpler game, so it honestly needs a little bit more going on in the moment-to-moment than Spider-Man 23 does. To put it another way, Spider-Man 2004 is the swinging, while Spider-Man 23 juggles a lot more. I think I personally prefer the fluidity of the swinging in Spider-Man 23, but as a Spider-Man simulator, it can't really hold a candle to the way that Spider-Man 2004 handles things. Spider-Man 23 uses its web swinging to let the player express themselves, both as they travel from place to place and in combat. It's fluid and fast, and it feels good, but if it required more attention from the player, they would likely start feeling overwhelmed by the weight of all the game's mechanics, like the layered combat, which is much better than Spider-Man 2004's. The comparison here is a lot less nuanced than the web swinging one. In Spider-Man 23, the combat is fast and responsive and able to be paired with a lot of the other skills you pick up throughout the game, like web swinging. It's pretty simple to juggle multiple enemies at once, but you frequently are given opportunities to avoid fighting large groups of them in the open by using stealth. When it comes to combat, Spider-Man 23 gives the player a laundry list of options on how to deal with problems, while Spider-Man 2004 is a lot less accommodating.
I'll take you on.
To be blunt, there are really no combat options in the game. In my opinion, this is Spider-Man 2004's weakest area by far. Essentially, you're limited to a handful of combos you get from in-game vendors, and that's about it in terms of variety. Large groups of enemies will wipe the floor with you if you don't pick off one or two of them from the sidelines before the main fight starts, resulting in a game over that hardly ever feels fair. Where Spider-Man 2004 shines a little brighter, however, is with the ideas it has on handling Spider-Man villains. For the most part, encounters with the big bads in Spider-Man 23 are handled by throwing a bunch of basic enemies your way for you to fight off, or with a boss fight against the villain that honestly just plays out like a more cinematic version of the fights with your run-of-the-mill criminals. That's not always the case, but in general, it feels like Spider-Man 23 doesn't have a whole lot of ideas about how to deal with Spider-Man's biggest villains. In Spider-Man 2004, however, the villains are usually paired with interesting set pieces that push the player to use their powers and skills in new ways. For example, Mysterio has you climbing around this weird little jungle gym thing to get him to prove that he's a fraud or something. It wasn't ever super clear. Later, he sets a theater on fire and you have to save people from the fire while taking out some flying robots. So do these sections work and feel good to play? No, of course not. But the game does show off the fact that it has ideas when it comes to dealing with Spider-Man's villains that don't simply revolve around getting in a punch-out with them. What I think I'm getting at here is that Spider-Man 2004 has a lot going on for it in concept that I prefer over Spider-Man 23, but in execution, Spider-Man 23 just feels better to play on basically every level. On top of all that, Spider-Man 23 tells an incredibly engaging story that, while not perfect, is a fantastic Spider-Man story. I love the way that it puts twists on classic characters that we've seen for years while still maintaining a lot of the core that makes them so popular in the first place. And don't get me wrong, as much as I love hearing Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, and Alfred Molina try their best at voice acting to hilarious effect,
What? Not now.
I don't think anyone could actually argue that the performances in Spider-Man 2004 are better than the ones in Spider-Man 23. I think it could be said that the story in Spider-Man 23 sometimes gets in the way of the appeal of playing a Spider-Man video game, actually being Spider-Man, with the frequent walk and talks and cutscenes. But the story and performances are so good that it hardly matters that they're interrupting the segments of swinging around New York City. That was my impression of that guy from that show. I've never seen it.
You really are the most devious bastard in New York City.
Spider-Man 2, the movie, the game, is a lot more streamlined than Marvel's Spider-Man 2, but that's because it has less going for it. With laughably bad performances, poorly written dialogue, ghoulish combat, and this horrific impression of J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson.
I don't pay you for your opinion, Parker. I pay you for photos.
Well,
Let me guess. You don't have any pictures, do you?
It's no wonder that those aren't the things that people cite when talking about what made it great. What's undeniable about it, however, is that its design, no matter how outdated it is, nearly 20 years later, is still being used as a blueprint for modern-day Spider-Man games. There are so many elements that are directly lifted from the game that make their way into Spider-Man 23, albeit with about 20 years of extra polish, that it's impossible to say that it's a bad game. Honestly, it reminds me a little bit of Resident Evil 4 in that regard. It's a game that simply doesn't hold up very well for anyone who didn't play it back in the day. Despite that, it's undeniable that Resident Evil 4 is one of, if not the most influential games ever made. While I'd wager that Spider-Man 2004 doesn't quite have the same reputation of Resident Evil 4, it still falls into that same category of game. I mean, look at this. There's so much that's just flat out one-to-one in both games. They both have these little car chases that follow similar patterns. Some of the combat abilities, like the web yank for ranged weapons, are the exact same, and look at that. Spider-Man 2004 even does the same zoom into the city that 23 does when you're fast traveling. None of this is to say that Spider-Man 23 is copying Spider-Man 2004, but it does absolutely feel like it took a lot of the elements from the game and reimagined them for 2023. So we return. Is Spider-Man 2004 better than Spider-Man 23? No, it isn't. Not anymore, but Spider-Man 23 has more that it needs to accomplish and be than Spider-Man 2004. It isn't a movie tie-in. It costs over $315 million to develop, $115 million more than the movie Spider-Man 2 cost to make. It has to be a reason for people to buy a PlayStation 5, and I think that it is, but those expectations just weren't there for Spider-Man 2004, so it's a much simpler game that hinges almost entirely on its web-swinging mechanic and hardly anything else. All that said, Spider-Man 2004 has maybe the funniest tutorial in all of gaming, so what do I know?
Welcome back, I guess. I'm sure you miss me more than I miss you. You don't actually jump until you've let go of the jump button. Okay? Now go jump in a lake. The line that connects each dot to the map represents how high off the ground that particular thing is. Oh, that makes sense, right? Yeah, sure it does. You always do what people tell you. You know, there's a word for that. Loser! Huh. I guess you're smarter than you look. Good for you. Go teach him about justice. You know, by beating the snot out of him. I mean, this isn't a civics class. What do you expect?
Please like and subscribe.